All right, let's talk about Roman gladiators. We're going to head straight back to ancient Rome, right into the heart of the Colosseum. But we're leaving the Hollywood special effects at the door because we are about to uncover the surprising, super complex, and totally calculated truth about the most famous fighters in history.
And I mean that, seriously. That image you have in your head, the half-naked brutes in a chaotic, blood-soaked arena, fighting until only one man is left standing, it's a powerful image for sure, but it's been massively shaped by movies, not by historical fact. The reality is way more fascinating.
So here's how we're going to break this all down. First, we'll tear apart the Hollywood myth. Then we'll rebuild the real picture, looking at gladiators as professional athletes. We'll get into the strict rules of their fights, their surprising celebrity status, and finally, we'll uncover the real purpose of the arena as a powerful political machine. Okay, first things first, the gladiator we all think we know. The one from the big screen. This is the version of the story that's been told over and over again, but it is time to draw a line in the sand and separate that cinematic fiction from what actually happened. Yeah, this probably looks familiar, right? Half-naked guys, an arena just drenched in blood, and this idea that every single fight was a brutal battle to the death. The whole story is just one of mindless, out-of-control violence. But this is the caricature. This is the myth we're about to take apart piece by piece. So let's start building a completely different picture. I want you to forget the idea of a disposable killer. It's time to meet the gladiator as a professional athlete, an incredible investment, whose survival was actually the whole point.
And here it is. This is the core misunderstanding. The myth paints them as these disposable brutes you could just replace in a heartbeat. The reality? They were unbelievably expensive assets. An owner of a gladiator school, a lanista, invested a fortune in every single fighter. They weren't mindless, they were highly trained professionals whose skills were sharpened over years. Losing one wasn't just a tragedy, it was a massive financial blow.
So where did all this training happen? Well, it happened in places called ludi. And these weren't prisons, not really. They were more like elite, specialized training academies. This is where gladiators lived under a super strict regimen, mastering everything from specific weapons to complex combat techniques and endurance drills. You could think of them as the Olympic training centers of the ancient world.
And we're talking about a long-term investment here. It took years to train a gladiator up to a high level. And to protect that investment, they got the best medical care available at the time. They had dedicated doctors, even masseurs, to make sure they recovered quickly and stayed in peak physical condition. See, survival wasn't just a personal goal for the gladiator. It was the entire business model.
Which brings us to the arena itself. Okay, so if gladiators were these valuable assets, it makes total sense that their fights weren't the chaotic free-for-alls we see in the movies. No way. It was a structured, strategic, and heavily regulated sport.
A typical match was incredibly structured. It all started with strategic pairings. The combat itself was watched over by a referee. A fight didn't just end with a death. It was over when a fighter was defeated, injured, or, and this is so important, surrendered. The final call often went to the sponsor of the games, but here's the absolute key. Mercy was common. A skilled gladiator was just too valuable to kill off for no reason.
And get this, they had officials to make sure everyone played fair. The summa rudis. These guys were the referees of the arena. They carried a rod called a rudis, and their entire job was to enforce the rules. They could pause a fight, separate the fighters, and they were there specifically to prevent unnecessary deaths and make sure the whole show followed the rules. The fights themselves were a science. These were not random brawls. Promoters would carefully design the matchups to be balanced and exciting. So you'd get a heavily armed Murmillo with his huge shield and sword going up against a lightly armed but super agile Gladiatorius with a net and a trident. It was a strategic battle of strengths versus weaknesses, kind of like a chess match with weapons, all designed to entertain the crowd with skill, not just gore. Okay, so they were professional athletes in a regulated sport, but who were these fighters? The common belief is that they were all slaves and criminals, but that's just another part of the myth that we need to fix. Their social status was way more complicated than that. Let me introduce you to the Octorati. These were free Roman citizens who voluntarily signed a contract to become a gladiator. Now, why on earth would anyone do that? Well, for the same reasons people chase dangerous professions today. Fame, money, glory. For some, it was a way out of crippling debt. For others, it was a shot at a level of stardom you just couldn't get anywhere else in Roman society. And believe me, they were celebrities. I mean, we have archaeological evidence everywhere. Their faces were on mosaics and oil lamps. Graffiti on walls in Pompeii declared them as heartthrobs. Kids played with gladiator action figures. Women collected tokens with their names on them. A top-tier gladiator could earn a fortune, enough to live a life of luxury and even buy his own freedom, retiring as a living legend.
And here's something you might not know. While, yeah, the vast majority were men, female gladiators did exist. They were called gladiatrices. Now, they were definitely rare, and Roman writers often talk about them like they were these exotic, special attractions rather than a regular part of the games. But historical records and even stone carvings confirm they absolutely did step into the arena.
So, if the games weren't just about mindless slaughter, what was the ultimate point of it all? This is where we get to the real heart of it. The arena was so much more than an entertainment venue. It was a powerful political machine.
But that brings up a huge question, right? If the reality was so structured and professional, why does this myth of chaotic violence stick around? Why does Hollywood keep getting it so wrong?
The answer, honestly, is pretty simple. Chaos sells. Constant death is dramatic. The truth, a world of regulated fights, financial contracts, advanced medical care, and complex strategy is just, well, it's less cinematic. It's a much more nuanced story. And nuance doesn't always make for a great blockbuster action scene.
At the end of the day, the games served a powerful state function. For the emperors and the rich elites, they were a way to show off their immense power and wealth. For the public, they were a distraction, a way to keep the masses happy. You know, the famous bread and circuses. But they also reinforced core Roman values, the discipline of the fighters, their courage, and the clear hierarchy of the whole event. It was all a reflection of the Roman social order itself.
All of this leads us to a really powerful conclusion. The Roman arena was not a place of madness. It was the exact opposite. It was a place of extreme order, where violence was controlled, packaged, and presented for a very specific purpose.
It was a machine, engineered for political and social control. And the gladiators, these highly trained, incredibly valuable, and celebrated athletes, were its most refined, most crucial, and most effective components.
So I'll leave you with a final thought. The story of the gladiator shows just how easily a complex reality can be flattened into a simple, dramatic myth. And it makes you wonder, doesn't it? What other parts of history do we think we know, but have maybe only ever seen through a cinematic lens?